Welcome back to Arts Educators Save the World, a podcast where artists and their mentors talk about the impact that arts education has had on both their lives. Welcome back, everyone. Today is a bonus episode. It is a chance for us all to catch up and reset. It's a chance to welcome our new listeners. Thank you so much to our friends at the How We Made Your Mother podcast for sharing the stories of podcast co-stars Josh Radnor and Craig Thomas, both of whom have been guests on our show because they've benefited from the brilliance of artist mentors. And we welcome all of those who have learned about our show from How We Made Your Mother here into our community. And as part of that, I'd like to express gratitude for a listener who sent us an incredible note that I would like to read for everyone because I think it's worth hearing in its entirety and to welcome her to our community. She says, "Hi, Erica and Alec. My name is Jamie, she, hers, and I discovered your show a few days ago. After listening to a few episodes, I felt compelled to share my story. I'm an actor and teaching artist based in Ohio, about an hour away from where Josh Radnor grew up. I was born premature and I live with cerebral palsy. My parents made the incredible decision to put me in theater at the beginning of 4th grade. At a time when my world was filled with therapists, meetings, and data, all facilitated by people who didn't really know who I was or what I could do. So they chose to focus on what they could try to fix. My theater teachers and directors were the first people to tell me and my family, look at what Jamie can do. It quite literally altered the trajectory of my entire life. Before performing became my joy, and the people who ran that program taught me the importance of being seen and not being allowed to say I can't without trying the new thing first, no matter how scared I was. By the time I was 16, I knew I wanted to continue as an actor, but I also knew that I had to teach. My educational background is in theater and communications, and I began working in youth theater in 2017. I've spent the last 8.5 years teaching students from kindergarten through high school seniors, and have had the immense privilege of working on a few contracts geared towards learners who have disabilities. One of the people who got me on stage as a kid is now my closest friend. Arts education, and particularly theater education, has incredible power. Thank you for your show. It is an inspiration, and I can't wait to hear more stories. Thank you, Jamie Pavlovsky." Well, thank you, Jamie Pavlovsky. I'm crying. It's the morning. We haven't even really started the day. And I'm inspired by Jamie and by all of those who see arts education as the pathway to successful human flourishing, which is why we're here and which is why we continue to share these incredible stories of artists and their mentors. And so today, we have a chance to revisit our origins. I'm thrilled to welcome cultural historian, theater critic, professor, and public humanities scholar, Daniel Pollack-Pelzner, to our show. Daniel is a scholar in residence at Portland Shakespeare Project and a professor of English and theater at Portland State University. He writes for The Atlantic, The New York Times, The New Yorker, Slate, those small publications. But most importantly for our conversation, he is the author of Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Education of an Artist, from Simon & Schuster, available for pre-order now, with a very, very, very close release date of September 9th. Daniel, welcome to Arts Educators Save the World.
Thank you, Erica. I mean, the subtitle of the book really should be Arts Educators Save the World, and so I love that I get to talk with you about it.
Well, I was going to say, hopefully it's quite obvious to everyone why we invited you to share your experiences and your book with us. And also it creates such a lovely circle of life for us here at the show, and hopefully a lovely way for you to talk about your experience writing the book in maybe a little bit of a different way than you've been talking about it on. You mentioned off mic that you just got off of the Australia Today TV show. Do I have that right?
Yeah. If you want to know the weather in Brisbane, you see my face above the Chiron.
Perfect. So Daniel, tell us the origin story of this book. Where did you get the idea to, clearly writing a memoir about Lin-Manuel Miranda is a cultural zeitgeist activity, but you chose to frame this book in terms of his artistry and specifically his education as an artist. Can you talk a little about where you got this idea from?
Well, you're right, Erica. So like everybody, I became a Hamilton groupie 10 years ago when I first saw the show. Maybe not like everybody, I spent the next decade kind of stalking the show around the world when it opened in London and then Puerto Rico. And every time I interviewed Lin, I was so struck that he talked about the projects that he wanted to do based on what he could learn from the people that he'd be working with. And I thought, what a wonderful way to imagine a career just based on how you could educate yourself in collaboration with other artists. And as a teacher, that really resonated with me. And it seemed to be not just the perk of a guy who can work on whatever he wants at this phase of his career, but somebody who has always honored his teachers and mentors, going back to Barbara Ames's beloved elementary school music teacher, whom you had on the show. And I thought, we always want our students to have this sense of a growth mindset, right? That the way they see their abilities does not constrain what they're able to accomplish, but in fact that they should experiment, they should try things out, and through feedback and through collaboration and through consultation with people who have more experience, they can expand their toolkit. And I thought Lin-Manuel's a guy who has learned how to do this. And so my hope was that writing the story of his education as an artist, it wouldn't be a blueprint, but it could be a kind of mindset that my own students who want to have a life in the arts might be able to learn from, especially people who are trying to synthesize their own cultural heritage with an entertainment industry that's not always hospitable to a wider range of voices. So I wrote Lin an email, I guess it was about 4 years ago, with the totally cringy subject line, "Who tells your story?" And I pitched him.
Cringy but effective, I feel.
I pitched him on a book about his teachers and what he learned from them. And I kind of mapped out a series of teachers from childhood through his career today. And Stephen Sondheim had just passed away. So Lin told me he was thinking a lot about mentorship and how to honor those people who had shaped his career. And we met in the basement of the Drama Bookshop, where he wrote many of his works, and we came up with a list of teachers. And one thing that I really loved about going through this process, and that your podcast, I think, models so beautifully, is expanding the sphere of who might count as an arts educator. So, of course, there are phenomenal classroom teachers, and there are master craftspeople that Lin has worked with. And the first person that Lin wanted me to talk to was his mother, because she was the person, and we can talk about why, who gave him the tools to become an artist.
Well, let's talk about why. Why did the two of you decide to start with his mom, with his parent?
Well, so Lin's dad is amazing overachiever who only sleeps 5 hours a night and is a high-powered political consultant, champion of his son's work. His mom hasn't been as much in the spotlight. She's a child psychologist. And Lin was a tremendously sensitive child by all accounts. He would cry if he saw an unhoused person on the street. He would cry at the chord changes in Bridge Over Troubled Water because they moved him so much. And his dad really wanted to toughen him up so that he wouldn't get bullied at school and buffeted about, got him a little set of boxing puppets to try to get Lin to learn how to punch back. And Lin just hugged the puppets and said, no fighting. But his mom recognized that her son had this kind of empathic superpower. And she told me she saw her job as a mother and as a psychologist to let him know that it was okay to feel all the deep emotions that he was experiencing. She got him a book called TA for Tots, Transitional Analysis for Tots, which was a whole psychological framework from the mid-century that's just about recognizing that your feelings are as real as any other part of your body. And she would tell him, you want to be an artist? The phrase was, this is all grist for the mill. You should remember how it feels to be sad, to be anxious, as he often was at Hunter, surrounded by brilliant students like you, to feel to feel overwhelmed, to feel intimidated, to feel terrified. She said, because you'll want to use these feelings when you become an artist. And he granted that could become a little bit weaponized. He didn't want to take out the garbage. He'd say, you want to be a writer? It's all grist for the mill. You got to do that too. But it actually, it like literally paid off. He had his first summer job in high school was working at McDonald's, and he had a lot of math anxiety, and he had like nightmares about working the cash register and getting customers their proper change in time. He had this dream that the pencil he used to calculate the orders was impaled through his skull. And his mom told him, yes, this is really scary for you right now, but it's all grist for the mill. You never know when you're going to need to use this. And indeed, 20 years later, after In the Heights became a hit, Stephen Schwartz asked Lin-Manuel to write a new song for Schwartz's compilation musical Working about a first job. And he wrote his song about working at McDonald's behind the cash register. And his mom said, see, it's all grist for the mill.
What's interesting about that acknowledgement and that focus is I talk a lot in my conversations with both teachers and students who are struggling about the importance of reconnecting the mind and the body. And I have come to say frequently that one of the unintended victories of formalized schooling is that we have successfully convinced people that your brain and your body are separate entities, when in fact they always work together, and that a body that is not prepared to learn or is not engaged in learning is a mind that is not engaged in learning. And you and Lynn are pointing to even another aspect of that, which is that a heart that is not invested and engaged in learning is a brain that is not invested and engaged in learning, because it makes me think we have also separated the heart, right? We've said like to learn is to process information, and a brain is an information processor. And so anytime you're using your body, I would say your body, but now I'm going to add your heart in that work, means you're not doing the work of learning. And so I love that this early story brings us to the idea that learning is so much more than what's happening in your information processor. And artists are particularly well set up to rethink learning as the relationship between, I have said in the past, the mind and the body, but now I'm going to include the heart in that triad. So already I feel that I'm smarter from having your contribution into this conversation about the relationship between art making and learning and teaching.
Erica, that's such a beautiful way of framing it. And you're reminding me that, of course, Luz Towns Miranda, as a skilled psychologist, saw that her son was experiencing somatic responses to his learning environment. He would come home with stomach aches and headaches. All these other kids that Hunter could do math 10 times as fast as he could. And she would do breathing exercises. We all had stomach aches and headaches, by the way. That is a common refrain, I think, from kids who had, luckily, we've moved away from this designation of the quote unquote gifted child, which a lot of us who went to Hunter were marked with, which I think was in part some of the cause of that anxiety. I'm sorry to interrupt your story. Yes, you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. And so Luz would do breathing exercises with Lynn. She would rub his back. She would sing him lullabies, and that could help him feel the emotions, but get them to a place where he could move on from them. And that, I mean, there are plenty of people who've told me that what Hamilton and its intense political rivalries are really about is Hunter College High School, and what the dynamics are of being entered into a meritocracy that both anoints you and, traumatizes you for life.
Well, and certainly, I mean, I'm not a Hamilton expert. I mean, I love Hamilton. I'm not a Hamilton expert. Mm-hmm. And I certainly see that as a play about humanity and human relations that is decorated with historical fiction. I mean, I know, right, that the narrative emerged from a piece of historical writing, and it is certainly about the relationships among these, deeply complicated people.
That's exactly right. And we can talk more about its antecedents in Lin's education, but I'm thinking of the continued way that you're expanding the sense of what an education in the arts can provide. I was thinking about a few other categories of people beyond classroom teachers. Elementary school bus drivers, part of the education process of how Lin becomes an artist who can write a hip hop infused musical. So, how does a kid become versed in the beats of 80s and 90s New York hip hop? Part of it's having an older sister who takes him to see Beat Street movie theaters and lets him purloin her Black Sheep albums. But part of it is, and I imagine you're familiar with this dynamic, going to a magnet school that's attracting students from all across New York City. And so Lin is 45 minutes away. Hunter is on 94th Street on the east side. He lives about 207th Street up at the very northernmost tip of Manhattan. How does he get there? There's a private bus service that drives kids from the Bronx and northern Manhattan to these Upper East Side schools. And it's driven by this wonderful family whom I loved interviewing, the Baker family. The dad, Billy Baker, pastor at a church in Harlem. He and his wife run this company for many years, driving kids to school. And their son, Dwayne, was an aspiring rapper. He was a big guy who apparently was recruited to play football, but what he really wanted to do was sing, and he sang in his dad's church. And then he opened one night at the Apollo. He recorded a hip-hop album, and where he would test out his material was on the 4th and 5th graders who were sitting in the Baker bus on the drive down the West Side Highway from Upper Manhattan to the Upper East Side. And some of them were goofing off in the back of the bus, but little 10-year-old Lin-Manuel was sitting wrapped behind Dwayne Baker as Baker taught him the lyrics to Rapper's Delight and Ghetto Boys, Mind Playing Tricks on Me, and Beef by Boogie Down Productions. And the Baker family had actually been part of the early hip-hop scene. They'd used their van to drive around the early hip-hop crews in the Bronx so they could plug in their equipment to the lamppost outlets. They were friends with the Sugar Hill Gang. And so, just at the same moment that hip-hop is traveling from the Bronx down to the, sort of the white upper middle class enclaves of Manhattan, Lin-Manuel is going on that journey, learning these lyrics, and you can actually trace in his report cards what the Baker influence is. So early at the beginning of 4th grade, his teacher says Lin-Manuel's pretty shy in class. And then by the end, he starts to come out of his shell and has written a Jack and the Beanstalk rap for school. And then he writes another rap story with one of his 6th grade friends in which they envision a musical theater robot and a hip hop robot falling in love. It's a Les Mis Run DMC mashup called DMC meets 24601, Jean Valjean's Red Prison Tattoo. So he's coming to school with these rap tutorials from Dwayne Baker, and it's translating actually right into his classwork as he finds the mode in which he can excel for his classmates, which is writing funny, energized songs. So I want to give a shout out to the bus drivers of the world who are teaching students lessons that whose implications they might not even know for years to come.
Did any of the classroom teachers you interviewed reflect on how their pedagogy either changed or is reflected in making space for young people like Lin to engage their gifts and talents in the context of a classroom? Was that something that the teachers that you talked to were aware of or reflected on or struggled with?
Yes, I would say, so I'm going to refer listeners back to your amazing 2-episode series with Lin and Bobby Lopez and Barbara Ames, their beloved music teacher from elementary school. And I think it also comes up in that episode, but certainly Ms. Ames told me what I've come to think of as the Ms. Ames principle, which is you cast your shows based on the skills that all of your students have to bring to the production. So when Ms. Ames did Chorus Line, she didn't cut anybody from the chorus. Everybody got to go down the line and do their performance of the thing that they were good at. And in fact, and I think you shared this with Bobby's, you're doing Fiddler on the Roof, right? Bobby wanted to play Tevye. He wasn't cast. He played the constable instead. So Ms. Ames wrote a song for the constable to sing. And I think that had a huge influence on Lin-Manuel later on, that Tommy Kail, his director, said he loves to tailor parts for actors. If he's got Chris Jackson, who can sing amazing high notes coming out of a church singing tradition, he's going to write George Washington's One Last Time to give Chris a second act gospel solo. That seems to me the Ms. Ames principle of how do you recognize the talents that everybody's bringing in. And then a teacher a couple years later, Dr. Rembert Herbert, who was a beloved 8th grade English teacher at Hunter, had a sequence of assignments. This is, as I came to see, as tremendously characteristic of what made me wish I'd gone to Hunter, which was freedom supported by structure, or the space for students to do what they want with a scaffolding that would support them. So students were assigned to read Chaim Potok's The Chosen and teach a couple chapters to the class, but how they taught those chapters was up to them. So Lin-Manuel wrote a song for each of the chapters of The Chosen and recorded the song so that his classmates could lip sync along. And he said they didn't mind getting out of a little group work. And Dr. Herbert told me he had lots of wonderful students. Lots of students were great writers. He'd never had a student write a musical for a class project before. And he thought, okay, this kid needs to be connected to the Hunter student-run theater club. And he wrote Lynn a note on the back of his next essay saying, you've been kind of hibernating in this class, but it's spring, come out and play, and introduced him to the students in the group. So I think that mode of creating space where you have a learning objective that's tied to the content, but the mode in which students express it has flexibility, allowed a student like Lynn, for whom a lot of traditional modes of expressing knowledge, like a lab report or a math test, were not going to allow him to shine. But when Mrs. Yallows in trigonometry said you could do a creative project to explain the law of sines to your classmates, he rewrote Billy Joel's For the Longest Time as For the Law of Sines, and recruited 4 guys from the jazz chorus to be his backup doo-wop group and perform it for the rest of the class. And he even got a trophy for math achievement, which he had never gotten in his life before, and is still in the Galleria Lin-Manuel Miranda in Vega Alta, Puerto Rico, where you can see it today. So I just love these teachers who recognized that they had a student who could express himself in different ways than that traditional curriculum was set up, and allowed that flexibility for him to be able to shine in a way that just gave him the confidence to buoy him for the rest of his career.
I think that is such a hugely important insight that, that I appreciate the attribution to the particular school or even those particular teachers. But I think, that's where all good teaching should live, right? Which is, where do you want students to go? And what are students bringing into that interaction? So this asset-focused approach that you're describing. And then how do different tools for expression give students an opportunity to represent what they know and what the new stuff they've acquired toward the thing you want them to get to? That is, for me, the single most important insight about good teaching. The challenge is, I would say, it's extremely hard to teach people to teach that way. And so it references me back actually to teacher education, to the preparation of educators, and how do we prepare people for bringing an asset-focused approach into our classrooms, particularly in spaces that are increasingly stressed for many reasons, from the federal all the way down to the hyper local, around what our obligations are as teachers. I'm wondering, Daniel, how you think about those insights in the context of your own teaching. Has it changed the way you approach your work with students? You teach at a, large public university, and so you are interacting regularly with students who come into your space with a range of prior experiences, a range of, assets, and probably a range of willingness to share those assets. How has it changed the way you approach teaching?
Erica, researching this book has actually totally shaken up the way that I structure my classes now.
That's so exciting to hear.
And it used to be very much focused on a traditional kind of like essay sequence and maybe a midterm and a final exam that was geared toward the content of whether I was teaching a Shakespeare class or a British literature class or musical theater class. And now learning about Lin's education, it made me think, how am I and my colleagues in our institutions creating the space that would support the next generation of Lin-Manuels to be able to create the work that brings their own voice into our public conversation? So now in the class on American musicals, we've really sort of flipped the classroom. The students each pick a show that they want to teach the rest of the class about, and they decide what the aspect is of the show that they want to lean into. So I have set designers who have all of us take out pens and paper and come up with a set design for the production of The Wiz that we would like to see in 2025. And I have dancers who teach us how to do the time warp from Rocky Horror Picture Show. And I have business majors who ask us to look at the marketing plans for different musicals and how they've reached an audience. And then after we've looked at a number of musicals that are sort of part of the American canon, the challenge at the end of the course is, how do you want to add your voice to this history? And so for some students, that's making the case for a musical that ought to be on the syllabus that isn't. For others, it's pointing out some aspect of the works that we haven't focused on. And then some have taken up the invitation to propose their own original musicals that often reflect their own experience, their own musical backgrounds, their own identities that aren't reflected in the works of art that we've studied so far. So those are the parts that make me most excited when I had, this amazing student a few years ago who studied Hamilton and then came from a Muslim family, proposed a hip hop musical about the women of the Quran, who would each get a chance to rap their own stories. And I thought, this has to exist on stage. Now we got to connect with the student-run theater company. I've got to be the Dr. Herbert Yenta and matchmaker with the peers of the institutions that can help support it. But we've got alumni who are producing their work elsewhere. And I also love, and I think your podcast brings this out beautifully, students who become public defenders and classroom teachers and sales representatives in lots of different walks of life, but feel that they have the tools to be able to add their voice to the conversation and bring their full selves to bear, which makes me just as thrilled.
I think that's such a wise thing to share with everyone, because I think one of the possible I don't want to say negative. One of the possible outcomes of folks reading your book is that they could say, well, either I'm never going to be Lin-Manuel Miranda, or I'm never going to teach the next Lin-Manuel Miranda. How could this possibly apply to me, right? But what you're saying is so much broader than that, which is the conditions that made Lin-Manuel Miranda who he is are the conditions that ought to shape every person's educational experience. We all ought to have the gift of using our assets to share what we know. We all ought to be able to, have risk-taking scaffolded for us in our learning environments. We all ought to engage our bodies and our hearts in the context of, acquiring new content in our minds. And so I hope that is a part of these continued conversations that you're going to be having now over and over and over and over again as you share this book with the world. I love that you are another proud public voice for the value of artistic ways of knowing and doing in teaching and learning spaces.
Well, I'm so grateful that you framed it that way, Erica, because that's going to give me a beautiful way of translating the message heading out. And that's exactly the idea, is not just find the most exceptional person and, catapult them to stardom, but help everybody in your classroom, on your school bus, in your family house, feel that they can recognize the particular passions and skills and interests that they have and not be fixed in them, but expand them so that they can share them with the world.
And I want to point out, too, that though Lynn and myself and Bobby Lopez, we had the extraordinary gift of growing up in New York City around these folks, we have interviewed people from across the U.S. who have gotten these incredible gifts in the places where they've grown up. So Cody Renard Richard, who is probably the finest production stage manager on Broadway today, who we interviewed with his high school theater teacher, grew up in rural Texas. His whole family is cowboys. And he, was able to have his gifts as an artist and a stage manager recognized in his tiny town in rural Texas. So of course, it helps if you are, taking the school bus with the folks who are putting up the speakers for Rapper's Delight in the Bronx in 1983. But that energy and that creative spark and that joy is everywhere.
That's so true. I love that. That was a great episode with Cody. And I feel that too, even out here at Portland, Oregon, which is a place many people had only heard of at the end of the Oregon Trail if their sister didn't die of dysentery and they didn't, hunt a bison.
Probably you did die of dysentery.
I met many a time. Many a time. It was actually the performing arts scene in Portland, Oregon that inspired me to want to write about artists like Lin-Manuel. And I love it when so many of our students who are first generation or haven't had, I think of a student who grew up in Coos Bay, Oregon. His parents worked at a casino, didn't understand why she wanted to study theater and the arts, but she fell in love with learning about the different ways that Shakespeare could be performed, and did an amazing thesis on 19th century debates over pictorial staging versus modernist staging in Shakespeare. Advised a theater company on how to do that, and then got a job in a sort of C-suite corporate office, staging events in Las Vegas for national conferences. And I was like, how did this come about? She took me to lunch to explain it. And she said, well, for the job, you had to research a client's needs and figure out how to realize them in 3 dimensions for a group of people. And she's like, I found 19th century archival images of Shakespeare performances. I can find anything and I can figure out how to translate it. And I was like, yes, you are. You can save any world that you are a part of. And she's making her parents very proud in the process.
I love those are arts. Those are jobs in the arts. Right. Everyone listening out there who thinks it's Broadway or bust, there are jobs in the arts all over the world and in all different corners of our, late stage capitalist space that we all occupy. And that kind of work, I would say, is a thriving career in the arts. And I imagine a lot of that is due to the way that you and your colleagues helped her frame her higher education and what it meant to be a learner and a doer as a university student. So that's pretty cool.
Well, can I reflect back to you, Erica? Have I shared with you my Erica Halverson is responsible for Hamilton theory of the world?
No, but that sounds delightful.
Okay, so you cut this if it doesn't make sense when I spell it out. But I think some of your avid listeners will know that Lin-Manuel got his first dose of stage stardom at Hunter College High School, particularly performing as the Pirate King in Pirates of Penzance in ninth grade, and learning how to ingest patter about modern major generals that would show up later on in Broadway hits. But what I didn't know before I started researching this book is that the real turning point in his orientation to what he could do as an artist came the next year in 10th grade when he was in a production of Godspell, which was the spring musical performance or musical rep at Hunter, the winter musical performance. And in Godspell, for the first time, he wasn't just a ham on stage getting laughs and applause. He played Judas, who betrayed Jesus and had a deep emotional moment of recognition at the end of the show, and it unleashed something in him that he hadn't performed before. His peers recognized it, and he started to feel like he could actually tap his deep feelings as an artist, and he went on to write an original musical at Hunter, and so on. So why was he in this production of Godspell? I had to interview the director, Siobhan Lockhart, who said the reason she wanted to put on Godspell at Hunter College High School in 1996 was because she had been in a production of Hair, the musical, at Hunter College High School in, I think, 1992, three.
She was in 8th grade. I can't believe her parents were like, sure, that sounds like a fine thing for you to do as a 13-year-old.
I've heard about maybe the nude body stockings on stage. But she said that this production of Hair created a sense of ensemble in which everybody, from the little 8th graders to the Bobby Lopez's auditioning for the part of Claude, or other artists at the senior level, were valued and were part of telling a story about how we want to live in community together. And when she came up through this sort of Hunter apprentice system of getting to choose her own play, what she wanted to do was recreate that Hair experience in another kind of 70s hippie-esque hangout rock show that would allow Hunter students to feel like they were part of the group. And it was all because of the director of Hair, Erica Rosenfeld, now Halverson, who created that experience for her. And she created it in Godspell, and that transformed Lin's sense of himself on stage, along with Siobhan's assistant director, Meredith Somerville, who took Lin to see Rent, which is another show about a group of bohemians hanging out together. And then he decided to write his own musical about what he was most afraid of. Nightmare in D Major premiered his junior year at the Brick Prison Spring shows about the ghost of a fetal pig dissected in AP Bio class who comes back seeking revenge on the student who cut her up. So had Erica not directed Hair in 1993 and inspired a young Siobhan Lockhart, she would not have directed Godspell, and who knows what would have happened to this poor kid who was just hamming it up on stage. But I think it speaks to peers as arts educators as well, and the amazing way in which we may not even know what sort of legacies we're setting up for the students who look up to us, but that, Erica, you were this amazing role model and arts educator for your own classmates, and that had this lasting ripple effect for Lin and for so many others.
Thank you so much, Daniel, for sharing that story. I hope that is interesting to other folks other than just me. It is obviously quite interesting to me. I will also point out that former podcast guest and vice president of documentary for Time Studios, Lauren Hammonds, was Frederick to Lin's Pirate King in that production of Pirates of Penzance. Thank you. And that Lauren is also now both an amazing artist, but a mentor and a peer arts educator in the space of VR and documentary filmmaking. And I don't think Lauren ever aspired to a career in the theater, but I do know that even then we collectively were a community of artists and artist mentors, and in part out of necessity, because we did not have theater teachers in the traditional sense. Our teachers saw their role as to set the conditions for us to do the work, and then they got out of the way. And there was a lot of stuff about that was super hard. And there was a lot of things about that I now recognize were set all of us up to be those kinds of artist educators. And I imagine that if you interviewed 100, 200, former Hunter theater kids, regardless of their profession now, you would find a very similar story, which takes me back to this idea that your book isn't just for teachers who want to teach the next Lin-Manuel Miranda, right? It's for people who want to open up kids' worlds and show them what's possible and scaffold for them what's possible in their own life making, their own life world making, whether that's composing the next Hamilton or building the next great theater technology in Las Vegas, or, building a CPA business that supports small business owners. That this is what an arts education gives you. And we so desperately need people to understand that right now.
I love that you're bringing it back to what teachers could learn from this story too. And I was so interested in this book. And first, shout out to Lauren Hammonds, who's awesome and was also in a hip hop instrumental group, Dugius, that Lin was obsessed with, and was the first guy that Lin showed his fledgling raps to as a ninth grader, because they were in Pirates of Penzance together. And Lin wanted me to make sure I included the name Dugius in the book in the hopes that Lauren would get Dugius back together. Shout out to Lauren and Dugius. I also interviewed the Hunter theater teacher, the theater advisor, when Lin and his peers were in musical rep, whom they knew as Ms. Dooley, now goes by Gina Nocera McCourt. And I was fascinated by what she told me, because she said she was straight out of NYU, wanted to be, the transformative high school theater teacher who directed the productions and saw the potential and transformed her students' lives. And she got to Hunter, and she told me that she was instructed by the students in no uncertain terms that her job was to sit in the back row of the auditorium and basically get out of their way so that they could run the show, but also to be there when they needed help and support. And so she said she just transformed her own pedagogy to realize that she was not going to be the impresario on the stage. She was going to be the support system. She was going to be the scaffolding, so that when they needed a trumpet player for Chorus Line, or a drummer for West Side Story, or when they were dealing with heavy machinery to create the scaffolding for the West Side Story flats, say, she was there. She would make sure it was safe, but her goal was really to learn from the students what was their vision for the show, what did they want to achieve, and then create an environment that supported them. And I thought that was such a generous act on her part, even though it sounded to me at least like it had frustrated her initial ambitions for what she thought her career as a teacher was going to be. And I think sometimes I've talked to other Hunter students who had drawbacks about this sort of student-run system. They thought sometimes it led to a little bit of favoritism, or a kind of an in-group of students who would pick each other. And I think that was a risk that the advisor sometimes tried to mitigate in thinking about casting choices. But I thought, what a wonderful model of a teacher who could learn from her students and from the teaching environment what it was that the students needed, that might have even been different than what she wanted for herself, but adjust to be able to be the person who then could enable them to do these amazing things.
The egolessness of that is really, I think, important to point out. I really appreciate that. Okay, one more question before you head out. What is the most surprising thing you heard across your interviews? Whether it was surprising about education, teaching, or even surprising about Lin. What is the thing that you were like, oh, that was not what I expected to hear?
I think a lot of people really tuned into Lin when Hamilton became a hit. Maybe they also knew about In the Heights if they were like musical theater fans. I hadn't realized that Hamilton, when it opened, was the 8th musical that Lin-Manuel had written. if you count his productions back through high school and college. He'd also written a grunge rock jukebox musical at Wesleyan, that he'd also written a time travel sci-fi romance musical for his senior thesis project. And the reason that I think we don't know about these shows is because they were experiments and they were a lot of fun to be a part of. And Lin and most of the people involved in, well, particularly the sci-fi time travel romance show, felt this was not a show that needed to have a life beyond its incarnation in college. But it helped me feel, I have to admit, as a writer, I sometimes get hung up on the sense that like what I write is not going to be as good as what the people I admire can do, and that they can just produce masterpieces straight out of their heads, whereas what comes out of my head is not like that. So it was both surprising and kind of heartening for me to learn that Lin-Manuel produced a lot of other stuff along the way to producing something that would change the entertainment world. And that even the things he produced that would change the entertainment world didn't start like that. So his high school partner, artistic and romantic partner, had shared with me the very first draft he wrote of In the Heights when he was a sophomore at Wesleyan. And there's not a single word in that script or note in those songs that survived to the Broadway show, except for the title In the Heights and the phrase In Washington Heights. And I guess the joke about Usnavi's name. He had to completely rewrite the entire thing over the course of 8 years. So for me, that kind of freed up that sense of perfectionism that I think inhibits a lot of people who want to be creative. And instead, one of Lin's pals from high school was telling me what he thought really distinguished Lin in a community in which everybody was writing songs, everybody was writing plays, everybody was creating stuff, is that Lin just didn't get hung up on whether or not what he was creating was good or not at the time. He just wanted to make things. And he trusted that through the process of making things, he would get better at making things, especially if he did it with people who were better than he was already. And I thought, wow, that just changed my approach actually to writing this book. It gave me comfort thinking, okay, I don't have to get it right the first time. I'm going to write a draft. I'm going to trust my collaborators that we're going to iterate it and make it better. And I hope for anybody reading it, whether they want to make musicals or they want to make, affordable housing, or they want to make a new designer shoe, or they want to make their family dinner, that sense of being freed from it's not as good as the masterpieces I admire could come from knowing that the masterpieces they admire didn't start out that way either, but just started out as somebody wanting to make stuff and being comfortable with the process, making it better.
If you want to be an artist, make art.
Yes.
That is the single most important insight I can offer to aspiring artists. You want to be an artist? Make art. You want to be a writer? Write. You want to be a designer? Design. And that is the pathway to your commitments and careers and learning. And I'm so glad that is something that folks can learn from reading about a person who maybe seems a little bit untouchable as an artist, right? That the pathway to that is not genius spark that comes out of nowhere, but it's doing the thing. I have an artist friend, playwright. Her name is Jessica Bashline. Shout out to Jessica if she listens to this podcast. And that's what she always says. Do the damn thing. Right? That's how you get there. Everyone should pick up a copy of Lin-Manuel Miranda, The Education of an Artist from Simon & Schuster, out September 9th. I am getting a look at the beautiful cover. Google it. It is gorgeous. It has Lin and many of his collaborators on the cover. It features author Daniel Pollack-Pelzner's name right on the cover. It's gorgeous. Pick it up. Be in dialogue with it. Daniel's got some tour dates. You can go on his website and find out where he's going to be and when. And if you are new to this podcast, I encourage you to check out our archive of episodes that features folks like Lin-Manuel Miranda and Lauren Hammonds and Cody Renard Richard, but also artists of all stripes, from culinary artists to ceramicists to comic book writers. and get inspired. Be an artist, be an educator, be part of our conversation. Daniel, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Erica, for having me. I learned so much from this conversation.
Oh, wait. I almost forgot. We can't leave yet because I have a theater guest, which is such a gift to me. Daniel, I'm going to ask you to participate in our favorite closing ritual that Alec and I have come to see as a core part of Arts Educators Save the World, which is a lovely round of 3 things. It's very simple. Yay! I'm going to ask you a question. You are going to come up with 3 answers. In between, I'm going to give you a little shout of 1, 2, 3 things. And then you are going to ask me a question, and I get to come up with the 3 things. To listeners, as you know, we have not heard these questions before. We are coming up with them off the cuff. So if there is pausing and awkwardness, that is all the joy of improv. So Daniel, give me titles of 3 musicals that you plan to write in the future.
Okay. Let's see. The first title of the musical I'm going to write in the future is called Whale Song.
1.
How to Talk to Porcupines.
2.
The Year I Moved to Mars.
3 things. I love all of those musicals. I'm especially interested in Whale Song because is it in English or is it in Whale?
It is in Welsh entirely.
Oh, Welsh. Great. And so it's not the but it's more of a human
That's what they speak in Wales.
sounding music. Oh, I thought you meant whale, W-H-A-L-E.
I do, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. There actually was a musical recently that I heard by Pasek and Paul from the point of view of a whale, which I'd forgotten about, and now I think there needs to be more of that.
I agree. All right.
Okay, Erica, what are 3 things that you learned in high school?
Oh, wow. How to make my own fun.
What?
Ways to convince my parents that I was somewhere where I wasn't.
2.
The longest possible bus ride you could take and still not get where you wanted to go in New York City.
3 things.
Yippee! And 3 ways for our listeners to get involved with our show. First of all, please like and subscribe. We are really excited about our new listeners, and we're really hoping that you all can become part of our community. That's 1. Thank you. And we also would love if you give us some feedback on the show, on how you feel about the show. You can do that in your favorite podcast app right there in the comments. You can also write to us at artseducatorspodcast@gmail.com. You can also write to us through our website. That beautiful letter that I read you at the beginning of the episode, that came to us from a listener who wanted to be part of our community. So write to us.
2.
And if you have suggestions for guests, people that you would like to hear on this podcast, please send them our way. Bonus points if you know that person. I have lots of wish list guests myself. If anyone out there knows Eugene and Dan Levy, that's my first choice for future guests. So if you know those folks, come our way. And if you have suggestions for folks you want to hear on the show, send us those suggestions as well.
3 things.
Yes, onward together.
Arts Educators Save the World is hosted by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and produced and co-hosted by me, Alec Lev. Our executive producer is Doug Matica, and our audio producer is Justin Asher. Special thanks to our collaborators, the brilliant and talented Kate Baldwin, and our great friends at Story Pirate Studios, Lee Overtree, Benjamin Salka, and Amy Fiore. Original music is by Dan Lipton, and our artwork is by Lyra Evans. Check out our website designed by Cole Locasio at www.artseducatorspodcast.com. We're on Instagram at ArtsEducatorsPodcast, and you can write to us with your questions and comments at contact@artseducatorspodcast.com. You can also find us at a place called YouTube. And wherever you're listening, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review. It really helps the show. We're proud to be sponsored in part by the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the Gibb Faculty Fellowship. Arts Educators Save the World was created by Erica Rosenfeld Halverson and Alec Lev.